Welcome to the Accuplacer Next-Generation Reading Tutoring Series. Today we're going to be looking at the tips and techniques for answering reading comprehension questions. When you have a passage or a paragraph, you first want to read the question to see what you are going to be looking for. Then you're going to read through the paragraph, summarize the paragraph in your own words, and then match what you have summarized with the options given. And the reason I recommend this is it's much easier for your brain to match one item than it is to try to make a decision out of four very similar items. Let's look at this first passage. This one says this passage is mainly about how, so it's looking for a main idea. So let's read through this paragraph and summarize what we think is the main idea. It says many people have owned or have heard of traditional piggy banks, coin banks shaped like pigs. A logical theory about how this tradition started might be that because pigs often symbolize greed, the object is to fatten one's piggy bank with as much money as possible. However, while this idea makes sense, it is not the correct origin of the term. The genesis of the piggy bank is the Old English word pig, which was a common kind of clay hundreds of years ago in England. People used pots and jars made out of this red pig clay for many different purposes in their homes. Sometimes they kept their money in one of these pots, and this was known as a pig bank. Over the years, because pig and pig sounded the same, glaziers began making novelty banks out of pottery in the shape of a pig as a kind of joke. These banks were given as gifts and exported to countries where people spoke other languages and where no one had ever heard of pig clay. The tradition caught on all over the world, and today piggy banks come in all colors and are made of all kinds of materials, including plastic. So let's say you have read through this passage and you have it summarized, concluding that the main idea is about piggy banks. Then you go to look to match it with the four options that they've given you, and you see that none of them specifically talk about piggy banks. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to look for patterns of repetition. A main idea is going to repeat multiple times throughout the whole passage. A sub-idea is going to be mentioned once or twice. And an answer that's just wrong is not going to be mentioned at all, or it's going to be contradicted in the passage. So let's look at the first option. Option A is people in different countries save their money. We see that there is one sentence that talks about saving money, where it says they kept money in the pots, and this was known as a pig bank. Now, if you'll notice that because this passage is talking about piggy banks, there's an implied meaning of saving money, but there's only one sentence that is explicitly stated in the passage about saving money. So when you're looking for a main idea, you want to be careful about distinguishing between an implied message and something that's explicitly stated. When you're looking to determine repetition, you want statements that are actually stated in the paragraph, not the implied message. So because there's only one sentence, this option A is likely to be a sub-theme or a sub-idea. Let's look at sentence B. People in England made pottery centuries ago. Once again, we've got one sentence that talks about making pottery, so option B is likely to also be a sub-theme. Now let's look at option C, a common term originated in a surprising way. Let's say you're not quite sure what that sentence is what it means, and you don't know what the word term is. Then first you're going to skip it and start looking at the next one. Let's say you also look at option D and you're not 100% on that statement either. If you're not sure what the words mean, or if it sounds like it's worded a little weird, then what you want to do is find synonyms for each of the words in those statements to help you have a better understanding of what they're asking for. So let's break down option D. We have the word unusual, which could be odd or unfamiliar, custom, which could be habit or tradition, and got started, which could be began or originated. So now we're looking for an unusual custom got started, and it could also be an odd habit or tradition beginning. And we see that at the beginning and end of this passage, there are statements that talk about tradition. Once again, option D is likely to be a subtheme because it's mentioned at the beginning and the end of the passage, but it's not repeated throughout the entire passage. Now let's go back to option C. Now that's the only one left, so there's a good chance that's going to be our main idea, but you want to double check all of your choices to make sure that you're making the best choice possible. So once again, we're going to break down that sentence like we did with option D. We have common, which is familiar or ordinary. Term, we're not sure what that means, so we're going to skip it. Originated means beginning or started. And in a surprising way is going to be in a way that is unexpected or that surprised you. Now we're going to go to our passage and look for the word term to help us identify or figure out what that word means. And what we're going to do is we're going to look a little bit above and a little bit below where that word is to help us figure out what that word might mean based on the context of the passage. So from the underlined portion, we see that the origin of the term, the genesis of the piggy bank, is the Old English word pig, which was a common kind of clay. So from that, we can guess that term means word or idea, and it's referring to the origin of the word piggy bank that came from the word pig clay. So now that we know what we're looking for, we're going to look throughout our passage for words that refer to pig or piggy banks. And we see that throughout the entire passage, there's multiple references to piggy banks, the animal pigs, and the clay pig. So because there's so much repetition throughout the entire passage, then that would help us to guess that option C, a common term originated in a surprising way, is going to be our main idea. Let's look at the next passage. This one also says the passage is primarily about, so once again we're going to be looking for a main idea. So we're going to apply all the techniques that we just went over. Now let's say you read through this entire passage, but you can't identify a main idea of the two paragraphs together. If your passage has more than one paragraph, then you can break them down into individual paragraphs and find the main idea for each of those paragraphs. So let's read through this one and then identify what the main idea is for each of those paragraphs. This one reads, unemployment was the overriding fact of life when Franklin D. Roosevelt became President of the United States on March 4, 1933. At the time, the government did not systematically collect statistics of joblessness. Actually, it did not start doing so until 1940. The Bureau of Labor Statistics later estimated that 12,830,000 persons were out of work in 1933, about 1/4 of a civilian labor force of more than 51 million. Roosevelt signed the Federal Emergency Relief Act on May 12, 1933. The president selected Harry L. Hopkins, who headed the New York Relief Program, to run FARA. A gifted administrator, Hopkins quickly put the program into high gear. He gathered a small staff in Washington and brought the state relief organizations into the FARA system. While the agency tried to provide all the necessities, food came first. City dwellers usually got an allowance for fuel, and rent for 1 month was provided in case of eviction. So when we summarize both of these paragraphs, we see that the first paragraph is talking about where the government identifies the problem of unemployment, and the second one is where the government presents a solution for the unemployment problem. So now we want to look at how do these two main ideas relate to each other. And we see that these are a problem and solution relationship. And we'll talk about relationships in another video. So together, they form the creation of President Roosevelt's FARA program, option D. So that's going to be our answer to what this passage is primarily about. Now, just for practice, let's go back and look at what A, B, and C are in terms of main idea, sub-idea, and wrong answers. Option A says methods of estimating unemployment rates in the 1930s. We see that this is just going to be a wrong answer because the passage states that the government didn't start doing that until 1940. So that's a contradiction between the passage and the statement. Option B says the effect of unemployment on United States families. This could be a good sub-theme for the first paragraph, but not so much on the second. So that would be considered a sub-theme. Option C is also going to be a sub-theme. Option C says President Franklin D. Roosevelt's presidency. This passage is talking about one aspect of his presidency, but not all of it. So option C is going to be a sub-theme because it's too general. Let's look at our next example. This one says we can conclude from the information in this passage. So anytime they ask you to conclude, infer, or it says the passage suggests, then you're going to want to treat it like a true-false question. You're going to ask yourself, does the passage make the statement true? Does the passage make the statement false? Is there nothing about this in the passage, therefore making the statement true? Is there nothing about this in the passage, therefore making the statement false? Let's look at each of these options. Option A says women today are highly successful in winning equal rights. The passage says that with varying success, many women around the world today struggle for equal rights. So that's a contradiction, which is going to make statement A false. The passage says they're struggling, the statement says they're successful. Let's look at option B. Only pioneer women have been considered equal to men. The passage says the following factors initiated the greatest number of improvements for women: violent revolution, world war, and the rigors of pioneering in an undeveloped land. Statement B is incomplete. It's only giving us the option for pioneers, where the passage gives us revolution, world war, and pioneering. Option C is also going to be false because there's no mention of force. Option C says historically women have only achieved equality through force. So we're going to be looking for examples of force to gain equality. The passage says in all three cases the essential element that improved the status of women was the shortage of men, which required women to perform many of society's vital tasks. So the passage tells us it's a shortage of men that causes equality. There's no mention of force gaining equality anywhere in the passage, so that's going to make option C false because that statement is not mentioned. Option D says historically the principle of equality alone has not been enough to secure women equal rights. So once again, the passage tells us that it's the shortage of men that causes women to gain equality. There's nothing in the passage that states that women have achieved equality because it was the right thing to do. So that's going to confirm the statement made in option D, making that the correct choice. Let's look at the next example. This next one says, the passage suggests that people remember names best. So when it says the passage suggests, you can replace that with the author suggests. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that when you are making your choices, you want to get evidence from the passage. You want to use the author's use words to support your answer choice. If you will notice, all 4 of these options: meet new people, are intelligent to decide to do so, and are interested in people, those are all ways that you can remember people's names, but we want to look for what specifically does the author say is the best way to remember names. So when we read through this passage, it says, in the words of Thomas de Quincey, it is notorious that the memory strengthens as you lay burdens upon it. If, like most people, you have trouble recalling the names of those you have just met, try this. The next time you are introduced, plan to remember the names. Say to yourself, I'll listen carefully, I'll repeat each person's name to be sure I have it, and I will remember. You'll discover how effective this technique is and probably recall those names for the rest of your life. So the author tells us, plan to remember the names, I will remember. That's going to best match with C, decide to do so. These types of questions, the biggest risk is to interject your own opinion or your own thoughts or beliefs in choosing the answers. So you want to make sure that when you choose an answer, you always have evidence from the paragraph to support your choice. Let's look at the next example. The next one says, Morse left the art world and helped to invent the telegraph because. So we're looking to answer the question why. Now we're going to read through this paragraph. Samuel Morse, best known today as the inventor of the Morse code and one of the inventors of the telegraph, was originally a prominent painter. While he was always interested in technology and studied electrical engineering in college, Morse went to Paris to learn from famous artists of his day and later painted many pictures that now hang in museums, including a portrait of former President John Adams. In 1825, Morse was in Washington, D.C., painting a portrait of the Marquis de Lafayette when a messenger arrived on horseback to tell him that his wife was gravely ill back at his home in Connecticut. The message had taken several days to reach him because of the distance. Morse rushed to his home as fast as he could, but his wife had already passed away by the time he had arrived. Grief-stricken, he gave up painting and devoted the rest of his life to finding ways to transmit messages over long distances faster. So one of the things that you want to pay attention to when you're looking to answer questions is to pay attention to an order of events. A primary event, or the first event, is often going to be your main idea, and the secondary event, especially an event caused or created by the first event, is going to be considered a sub-idea. So in this case, it says, looking at the very end of this paragraph, it says that his wife had already passed away by the time he had arrived. Grief-stricken, he gave up painting and devoted the rest of his life to finding ways to transmit messages over long distances faster. So the event that occurred first was the death of his wife, and that caused him to want to come up with a way to communicate with people far away. So answer C is going to be the correct answer, experienced a personal tragedy in his life. Answer B is going to be considered a sub-theme. This would be an example of a cause and effect relationship, and once again we will talk about relationships in another video. But keep in mind that oftentimes you'll see examples like this where the main idea and the sub-idea are very similar, are very close. So you want to pay attention to the order. If one event triggers or causes the next event to occur, your first event is likely to be the answer to your question and the main idea of your paragraph. If we look at our other options, option A was tired of painting. That's just going to be a wrong answer because there's nothing mentioned about him not wanting or getting tired of painting. And option D could also be considered a sub-theme because it does talk about it at the very beginning about him being interested in technology and studying electrical engineering. So let's summarize the tips that we've gone over today. First thing you want to do is you want to read the question to know what you're going to be looking for. Then you're going to read through the paragraph, summarize the paragraph in your own words to answer the question, then match what the summary or answer that you came up with the options that you're given. If that doesn't work, or if you can't find a match, then you're going to look for patterns of repetition. A main idea is going to repeat multiple times throughout the whole passage. A sub-idea or sub-theme is going to be mentioned once or twice, and a wrong answer is not going to be mentioned at all, or there's going to be some type of contradiction between the statement and the passage. You can also try doing true-false, especially if they ask for something that says asking for a conclusion, infer, or suggest. You're going to ask yourself, does the passage make the statement true? Does the passage make the statement false? Is there nothing about this in the passage making the statement true? Or is there nothing about this in the passage making the statement false? You always want to get evidence from the passage. Use the author's words to support your answer choice. And this is true for every single question you answer. You always want to go back to the passage to support your choice. Order of events. If you can't decide if you've got two very close items, then pay attention to the order. Did one event come first? Did one event trigger the other event to occur? A primary event is usually going to be your main idea. The secondary event is usually going to be your sub-idea. And one last tip that is not written down is you always go with your gut instinct. Go with what your first answer is. Unless you've got specific information to support the choice that you made, then you're going to want to stick with your first answer. That's usually going to be the correct answer.